Thanks everyone for joining us. This is episode 2 of Unfiltered AI Leadership. I'm Harry Schwabe. I'm founder and chief exec at Newton's Tree, and I really enjoy doing this, which is basically talking to my friends.
Yep,
about AI. And last time we had a friend in common, Hugh, join us for the first episode, and now I have Dr. Grimes. I was thinking about how to introduce you. Very simply, you're a GP.
Yeah. Right? Well, actually, what I have to say now is that I'm a former GP because I handed in my license to practice about 7 weeks ago. I'm still a doctor. Don't worry. I'm a digital health doctor. I might go into that. But I'm not practicing anymore. But I have been a GP for 24 years, and I earned my spurs. I spent a lot of time at the front line, but that's where I am just now. But primary care is the kind of area that I know the best.
Fine. Okay. Well, we're going to get into that now. So, former GP, still a doctor, digital health extraordinaire, and have been through quite a journey, right? Do you want to? How would you introduce yourself these days? You're running a consultancy at the moment. What's your sort of one-liner when you meet new people? How do you describe yourself?
It's always really tricky to do that because it's constantly slightly changing. But what I will say just now is like, hi, I'm Keith. I'm a digital health doctor and former GP. I'm the founder of Curistica, which is an innovation consultancy that offers fractional chief medical, product and compliance officer services to health tech companies. I care about solving the world's biggest problems by helping companies build safe, effective, equitable, and sustainable solutions.
Perfect. Fantastic. And the aim, like we were discussing before we went online, of these conversations is to give people access to unfiltered insights from people who've been there, done that, and gotten the scars and have some lessons to share. The great opportunity around digital health and AI innovation, in particular in the healthcare system, is dependent on that expertise and know-how. The challenge is as a nascent ecosystem, it's not in textbooks yet.
That's true.
Yeah, there isn't really, an MSc or a BSc you can do on how to make AI work in healthcare. Because reality is we're still figuring it out.
Yeah, we're still working it out. That's exactly right.
But some of us, like yourselves, have, like I said, got some experience. And so the aim here is to basically dig some of that out of you. But that's not where you started, right?
No.
So I think it'd be really helpful to dig in a little bit around your journey right from the very beginning, as in what was the internal motivation to become a medic versus something else that you could have done? Was there something else that you wanted to do?
Yeah.
And then how you found yourself in digital health?
Yeah, great. Okay, so I'll go back. Right. Okay, I can really go back, but don't worry, I'm going to take too long on this.
No, it's fine.
My very earliest memory is watching Thunderbirds on TV. So, and the trouble is that used to be a really easy thing for people to understand. But now I'm older, so Thunderbirds doesn't make a lot of sense. So those people understand will know, but Thunderbirds was a Jerry Anderson show with puppets, which makes me sound like I've come out of the bloody ark. But no, it was essentially about a family that lived on an island, this tropical island, a series of brothers, and they used fantastical engineering and technology and had this team called International Rescue, and there'd be a disaster somewhere, and they would just up sticks with these sort of rockets and everything and go out and fix them and stuff. And that was the start of my love of technology. That absolutely came first. And then my entire youth was just obsessed with tech. I was born in the 70s, was really fortunate to see the rise of home computing and home games, the birth of the internet, the rolling out of all of it, the mobile phone, everything. I've sort of seen a lot of these things, and I was so geeky, I was getting involved all the time. But people always said, well, that's not a thing, that's not a thing. And of course, video games are never going to amount to anything. Well, here we go. It's one of the UK's biggest industries. The internet's just for emails. Well, there you go. Mobile phones, who would want to carry a mobile phone? And so on and so on. And then here we are with AI. So always loved technology, really curious, exploring, hacking, tinkering, and that kind of thing. With regards to medicine, I was really interested in the sort of medical sciences and challenge, but in truth, I wanted to go to university and write computer games. But I can refer you to my previous answer.
Oh, really?
Computer games are like, who's going to do that? and I did well at school and had the kind of, this may be familiar to some people on the call, right? You could be a doctor or a lawyer, you know, doing these things. I don't want to be a lawyer. So I went to medical school. And all the way from the start, I was like, well, how can we use technology in this? And of course, there was very little of it at all. But I was always trying to find a way in. So along the way, I did an intercalated degree in chaos theory because it was the early 90s and chaos theory was the thing.
But as part of your medicine.
Yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
Okay.
But to make it a little bit clearer, it wasn't just a sort of jolly tech year. I mean, this was looking at deterministic chaos in child heart rate variability, or rather neonatal heart rate variability. And the idea being is that measures of deterministic chaos indicate a more healthy or mature system. And so we were looking into that, and it was just an intercalated degree, but I got to use a lot of technology and work with little babies, and loved it. And then finished medical school, and then all these things that I tried to bring in. My yearbook photo from medical school, and the thing says, you know, people are saying, well, this doyen of the internet, whatever that is, kind of thing. And if he's distracted, don't worry about it. He's thinking about a fully computerized Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, where I went. And that was in 1995. Now, I recently went back and gave a talk there, and I was like, I told you. 30 years later, they still haven't done it. But, you know, so loved that. And then as I went into medicine, I was always looking for a specialist within medicine. Now, because I love technology, I think I never properly settled in medicine. So I like generalism. And it was either emergency medicine or general practice. And general practice suited me more just in terms, it sort of fitted close with my idea of like caring for people. You know, it was beyond just the medicine. It was sort of a more holistic thing and gave a bit more flexibility. So I finished my training in 2000. Up to 2018, I was working pretty much as a full-time GP with an interest in urgent and unscheduled care. But every time I had a chance to work in tech along the way, I did, and it was often within the NHS. So I did a program in Scotland called the ECI program to do with electronic referrals and discharges in the early noughties. I worked on things like the summary care record and electronic prescribing with the NHS.
Was that part of the national program?
It wasn't part of the program for IT. No, not that one. No. The Scottish one worked.
Oh, sorry.
The other one didn't work. But the Scottish one turned into things like the urgent care summary, which went on. But I wasn't involved in MPFIT. But I did get involved in things like the summary care record. And then when we moved down to England in 2005. And when we were down here, I went and worked in an out-of-hours service. Became a clinical lead there. And I said, I really want to do techie stuff and this. And they said, well, you can do that if you do clinical governance as well. And you could probably predict what happened. It was like that much clinical governance and that much tech. But I still tried. And then got involved in clinical safety work, really enjoyed that. And then in the sort of 2010s, started doing things like more remote monitoring, particularly in elderly care with this company. And then I was an IT lead and an innovation lead in the sort of CCGs and PCTs. That's where I got interested in the leadership side of things. Still really, really frustrating, because things were moving very slowly. I started going out to the States because I heard people like Ray Kurzweil, Daniel Kraft, and XMed, went out there and was like totally blown away. In part by the futurism, but more by the optimism and the energy. It was that, you know, in the UK, I'd say, oh, why don't we try and do this? People were like, well, I don't know if that's going to work. And then in the States, it was like, I've had this. And they're like, wait a minute, I'm going to get this guy over here. He's funding ideas like this. Like, I haven't even told you, kind of thing. You know, it was crazy. But people were just doing stuff. I thought, I need to do this. Came back home, tried a whole bunch of times with VR in my own practice. I used VR with patients, did some stuff with Google Glass. But as I was trying and it wasn't sticking, I was getting more and more frustrated and work was building up. So in 2017, the kind of things broke and I burnt out. I was really unwell and off work for 5 months and had firsthand experience of the majestic terror of things like depression, everything. Made it through. And then I cannot keep doing something that doesn't really light me up the way that tech does. At which point Babylon got in contact. Just really good fortune. And I spent 4.5 years there working on all the stuff.
What was your formal role? Did you have a formal job?
I came in as director of clinical innovation, then the director of digital health and innovation. And that was like, it wasn't so much like an executive role, but it was, they had a lot of doctors and epidemiologists working on the AI products they had, which were principally expert systems, but a probabilistic model as well, which at that point was quite new. But of course now it was like, well, but you know, it was very new then. But I had a lot of doctors earlier in their career. And doctors in an organization, even in a health tech organization, need a bit of structure and leadership. So I was brought in to help with that. but also get my hands dirty and learn, which I did, and built up this sort of digital health guild, which was clinical subject matter experts working across the product teams, and try and sort of raise the appetite for risk, because as early adopters tend to be very, very risk averse, rightly so, but as you progress through your career, you tend to manage risk a bit more. And if you're building something like a symptom check or a triage, if it's very risk averse, it's not so useful.
You
need to get the right balance. So worked on that, and then a number of the products, and fell in love with the world of product and product management, and learned all about AI from some of the best scientists and engineers and the commercial side, and I just loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Can I double click on the Babylon experience? So my first interaction with Babylon, which will probably be a lot of people's first interaction with Babylon, was through Twitter. Through I can't remember his name anymore, but anonymous doctor.
Dr. Murphy was the title he went by. It's Dr. Watkins, David Watkins.
Yes. And it was interesting for me as a medical physicist who's interested always in testing and validating performance of products. That it seemed like the Babylon product hadn't undergone that process until this anonymous Twitter account was doing these what looked like user acceptance tests.
He was testing edge cases, but like edge cases that maybe shouldn't be edge cases, saying, look, this is a really obvious thing, here you go.
And I'm really curious what that was like as an insider. It's very, as a spectator, to one, the really encouraging rise and adoption of Babylon as a company, and the product that they were offering was very encouraging, and has had lots of positive externalities subsequent to it, which we'll get on to. But also was really interesting to see this quite tense discussion play out in public around what is the appropriate safeguards, quality assurance that needs to be part of the development and deployment process of these technologies. And the fact that it was being played out in public made it even more interesting. And that culminated in a Channel 4 appearance.
Well, it wasn't Channel 4.
BBC.
Emily Maitlis, Newsnight.
Sorry, yes, it was.
Yeah, I'll never forget that.
Yeah. And given your background, you're ultimately a technologist, but you're also a medic who chose general practice because you believe in holistic care and taking care of the entire person. What was it like as a person having to go through that?
It was instructive. It was interesting. It was difficult. It was all of those things. I mean, when I can absolutely say, going into Babylon, everyone coming into Babylon came in there with, particularly the clinicians came in with best intentions and this sort of commitment to safety and evidence and so on.
Yeah.
And we did this work. We did a lot of this work. What's maybe less obvious from the outside is that how do you do, like, what is the evidence that you need?
Yeah.
How much of it? What order does it need to come in? What are the standards? And it just wasn't clear. It wasn't that anyone was avoiding anything. It's just, there was nothing out there. We had this technology being deployed in a novel way, and there was no formal guidance on this as well. And the formal guidance that was there was open to interpretation. So coming in as a clinician to this, and actually as a GP to this as well, I'm very used to working in that situation, because every single patient, every single day is an exercise in achieving the best of multiple, probably not best options. What's the best of all of these, or what's the best for you as well? So I'd spent all my career helping understand that, juggle that, being comfortable myself, and also working with people too. And so what we did was we took that approach and said, well, this is what the guidelines say. Here's the spirit of the guidelines and the regulation. This is where the gap is. Like, what's the appropriate ethical way to sort of fill that gap, going from first principles, which we adopted. So there was actually a huge amount of pre-market work about testing. It used this chatbot on synthetic data, cases and so on, and then different sorts of random variables in there as well. And we were very, very careful about testing it with these sorts of test cases, so it got to a certain level of acceptability that we were comfortable with. And I suppose this comes back to people wanting things to be 100% accurate. But remember what I was saying, like, what was my clinical work beforehand? I worked in urgent and unscheduled care. So triage is like, I've been doing it for years.
Yes, yeah.
And I know what the baseline is. I really know what the baseline is in the real world.
Yes, of course.
And the baseline in the real world is not the same as the baseline when you get a bunch of experts sitting in the sort of cool room, fully caffeinated, going through some cases as well.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that you don't aspire for the absolute best.
Yeah.
But I was aware of what was happening right now and where patients were falling through the cracks and the consequences of that.
Yes.
So a substantial improvement on that seemed to me a really acceptable thing to do.
Yeah.
But we needed to evidence this. And that was the sort of approach that we went into it with this.
Well, it feels like you, and forgive me if this is like a naive oversimplification, was suffering from a similar situation with sort of autopilot and Teslas and self-driving cars, in that, you know, on a per mile basis, human drivers cause way more accidents, right? But when a self-driving, where a Waymo or a Tesla or something else has an accident, it gets massively amplified. And I don't think that's inherently an incorrect reaction to have as a human being, right? And you mentioned, hey, maybe one of the strategies or remedies would have been evidence generation. But are there other ways you could have approached not just how you developed and evaluated the product, but maybe how you engaged with the clinical community, the public, that might have overcome some of those what sound like socio-cultural barriers?
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. I'm sure there's many different ways, and you sort of when you reflect back on the approach that Babylon took, which was quite disruptive, you could have been less disruptive. Okay, of course you could have engaged more softly, gently over time, and so on. Right, that is true. Right, but I had seen people try this many times over the years, and I had barely seen the needle move on the baseline performance in the NHS coming in as well. So doing it the right way, the official way, was doing nothing.
Yeah,
was really doing nothing.
Yeah,
and looking at it, but I was seeing the consequences. Patients coming in, like if we take it out of AI for a moment, like patients coming in, having been seen in hospital and coming back to me, their GP saying, "Oh, I came out of hospital. They did something, I don't know what. They changed some of my medicines. I don't know what they were. They told me to come and see you to give me all of your results and change these medicines and arrange these other things. So tell me what the letter said." And I'd be there going, "Well, I don't have the letter because it hadn't come out." And this was like a week later, you know. So not AI, but that side of things. So we scrabbled to put this back together. And so efforts were made in that area, and things maybe changed a little, but behaviors didn't. And time and time again, every single different area this happened. And it becomes very hard when you spend all your time just apologizing to patients about how the system has failed them, seeing the consequences of that as well. And then thinking there is something that we can do here, but then being told, "Oh, but you can't do that. You can't do that because we do it this way and everything." But when I see people doing it the right way, it still doesn't happen. And that is very frustrating. So it opens up your appetite to try something different here as well. And I think that disruptive change did force some changes. And actually, I mean, one of the things was going into it, telehealth, video consultations, and remote, which wasn't uniquely Babylon, but other people did. But you know, I still have copies of messages, emails, Twitter DMs from people who were accusing me of being like, you know, immoral, like you know, this is unprofessional. You're going to be killing patients. They're like really horrible stuff. And you know, I couldn't go, "What's happening just now?" But what you're doing. But you know, so I tried to engage. But actually, interestingly, with the Dr. Murphy side of things, I did spend a lot of time trying to get him to come in even from the start and say, "Look, here, I'm here. We're open. Like, come and speak with me. I'll show you what we're doing," and so on. And he elected not to for his own reasons. I think it was important that he remained anonymous, at least to him. But that invitation I did put out. And some of the people that I now call friends, who still didn't agree with what we're doing at the time, people like Dave Trisker and stuff, but he came in. He answered. He came in. He saw what we did, and he had some of his questions answered. And he still had some concerns.
Of course,
but I just wish there'd been more of that sort of engagement. That would have been much easier.
Okay, and then so on that thread, just before we move on to sort of some of the positive externalities, there's a question that's come in from one of the attendees, and please do fire them in as you come up with them. So a challenging question. So they've said that, you know, Babylon is seen by some as a textbook example of poor or unethical leadership. What has your time at Babylon taught you about what good leadership behaviors look like? And you can obviously argue against the assumption as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not going to sort of spend time arguing against that because, you know, then you need to have a sort of bit of to and fro. But let me sort of talk about the things that were good about leadership in there, and particularly how Ali operated, and then the things that I believe about
Ali
leadership.
Parser, the CEO.
Ali Parser, yeah. So the first thing is that Ali was really very good and remains very good at clarity of mission and communicating that. And the people that came to Babylon were principally drawn by that. And he brought brilliant people in. Like, I met some incredible people that I learned such amazing stuff because it was the mission that brought them in. And whilst Babylon remained focused on this mission, and it was to put accessible, affordable healthcare in the hands of every person on earth, right? I believe that. I want everyone to have healthcare. I mean, that's the basic thing. I'm a doctor. Everyone should have healthcare. I just like to use tech to do it. I think tech's critical to do it, but there you go. Brilliant at that. Brilliant at that. Brilliant at keeping that mission clear internally and then constructing a culture and reflecting that in there as well. That is very, very important. Second thing that he's very, very good at is raising money. It's not all about that, but that allows him and allows the company to bring in the people that have the means, you know, intellectually and sort of commitment to mission, to actually build towards that as well. And then set up the environment to allow them to do that. I mean, in that sense, Ali was great. He was great at putting the idea out to the public and the world. He was great at challenging some of the accepted norms, which I think is really important, even if it makes you unpopular. How he did it, some people really disliked, maybe still dislike as well. But within some of the things that he said, there are truths in there. And I think that was very, very important. And you know, he did you know, care for the people within the organization. There was a lot of work in there, and I thought that was great leadership. Where I would say that it started to get a bit problematic for me was that when you assemble this great team of people, you're best to kind of let them solve the problem, like leave them to solve the problems. I think Ali, at least I perceived that Ali sort of controlled it a little bit more. And as the company grew and went from, you know, new customer to new customer, this kind of foundation that was being built was constantly being slightly pulled in different directions. And the work that we could have done to keep building on these early successes kind of got burnt off by chasing other things as well. So I think that was harder. I think. And then personally, in terms of leadership, and I think about this a lot because leadership's important to me. I think it's important for clinicians to enter leadership and be properly trained, and I received proper training actually in it along the way. It comes down to expert leadership. This sort of very, you know, the evidence suggests that when organizations are led by people that are sort of recognized experts in the core area of the business, that they just work better for a whole bunch of different reasons. I translate that into people are happiest when they're working in a business where they think their boss could do their job.
Interesting.
Not exactly their job, but you know, like has experience and understands that. And then under that, underneath all of that is lots of supportive actions as well. So for me to have an opportunity to be a leader in a health tech company, which has traditionally been slightly underrepresented in the health space, I think was really important. And then my role was then to help work with people and highlight the importance of that.
No, it makes a ton of sense. And following on that thread in terms of the positive outcomes through that experience, one of the things that, I don't know if you guys refer to it as this, but that I've come to realize is that there is a bit of a Babylon Mafia, a bit like the PayPal Mafia, which spawned basically so many other companies. From the founders of PayPal, you had Elon Musk and SpaceX and Tesla, and you had Palantir with Peter Thiel and all these other things. And I met Hugh many years ago, and he's now leading an incredibly effective and successful regulatory and health economic consultancy in Hardian Health. I met yourself. I met Umang Patel. All of you having this pretty formative and transformative experience in one of the, I guess, cutting edge, leading edge digital health companies. How's that helped you launch what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I wouldn't call it Mafia.
No, yeah.
Actually, I understand what you're sort of saying there. I sort of think of it as Babylon being a lighthouse.
Yeah.
And everyone was casting around in what felt like the darkness about, like they understood there was a problem. They were frustrated about what they wanted to do. They maybe had some aspect of it, in this case, technology and AI, that they were interested in expressing this. So they're sort of feeling this, but they're in the dark. And then Ali's clarity of mission, vision, and a place to go drew people in. And when he drew people in that were attracted by that vision. So they were kind of, their values were aligned. He was able to bring in people that were really good at their job. And also because he was clear about the fact that this was a disruptive change, people were willing to work on difficult problems in a space that might receive some challenge as well. And so coming together and then meeting and then learning from each other, it was almost like a university or something. It's like you really, really learn everything in there. It's not at all surprising that as people either left or as Babylon started to shrink and then folded, they would go off and do something. And not only do they still believe the same thing. They still have the same interests. They still have the same passion. They still got the same skills. They've got more skills because they've learned other things. But what they've got now is really important. They also know how not to do it as well, or what they think about this. So is it any surprise that the diaspora go on and succeed elsewhere? I always think of people like Annabelle Painter, Dan Malarkey, Satya Raghavanshi. Dan was one of the clinical AI fellows, one of the doctors. He's of course at Skin Analytics. We've got Satya, Accurix. I could run off all of their names as well, and they've all gone on. Why have they gone on to success? Because they're brilliant people. They learned a great deal. They've understood a little bit about what they would do differently, but now they've got their focus area and away they go. And it's the same for the medics. It's the same for everyone else.
Yeah. Brilliant. And then you mentioned also about leadership and working in a place where your boss could conceivably do what you're doing. One of the questions we had before that was sent in by one of the attendees was meaningful opportunities to get involved.
I've got machine learning. I don't think on that.
And AI in health. There's obviously a very sort of specific and maybe prosaic answer to that question. But I guess in more general sense, having been through the gauntlet, so to speak, and now being a leader yourself, what's a good environment for somebody who's early career to go in and have a productive, formative experience in AI in healthcare?
No, well, I'm obviously going to say that the Clinical AI Fellowship is definitely one. But we'll come back to that. It's difficult. I recognize it's difficult, difficult for me. And I don't think it's a whole hell of a lot clearer just now. It's maybe a little clearer. I mean, hopefully, because those of us who've gone through it, if we're speaking about doctors, or people working in health, nurses and everyone else, at least we've got some people who've kind of made it through on the other side to talk about how they did that. So that's number one. Good environments to do it. I spend a lot of time thinking about I speak to medical students, foundation doctors, resident doctors, consultants, people at all sorts of different stages. And they say, how do I get into health tech, or how do I get into AI? And it's actually going to be a slightly different answer for everyone. But the first thing I'll say is that if you want to do this as a doctor and really trade on the value of your clinical knowledge, I think you definitely do want to proceed a reasonable way through your clinical training and potentially even get up to sort of like, consultant level, post CCT level. That doesn't mean that you can't do things beforehand. I'm just saying that the real value of you as a clinician contributing towards this builds up to that point. And once you get to that point beyond that, then you've got kind of credibility with other clinicians as well as the wider.
And then you can do meaningful work.
But that doesn't mean that you can't be doing a lot of things beforehand.
Right.
My dream is that at some happy day, that there'll be some kind of, I'm a specialist training in digital medicine or something like that. And I've had some training at medical school, I've done my foundation, and then I enter in a sort of rotation through all these different areas and build towards like a consultant specialism. And in fact, last night after an event, I was speaking to the president of the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine, which is, I thought was just about doctors working in pharma. And she told me, no, this is for doctors that work with pharmaceuticals, but devices as well,
interesting,
including software as devices. Now, the names are a wee bit off-putting. I thought she said, pharmaceuticals. But actually, as we spoke, it made a lot of sense. And I have been looking around a lot for where to make my home. Faculty of Clinical Informatics, British Computer Society, where I'm currently fellow there. Dream of a Royal College, doctors, whatever. But actually, I think this is going to be an interesting one. So I'll be very fresh news to me, and I'm going to be exploring that more. But along the way, medical student, they're not teaching you as core stuff, but they'll give you some optional stuff. Do the optional stuff. There's loads. I was helping judge stuff at Imperial, like hackathons and stuff like that. That's a really good way into it. As elective opportunities, internships, we had an intern, Andrei Marinov, from Imperial. He came and worked with us this summer at Curistica, and he's now he remains connected, and he does work with us now too. So, where possible, with our capacity, I want to try and get elective students and interns through as well. Because I was once, didn't know where to go. I'd love more people to do this. Foundation doctors. The trouble is that once you get from foundation doctor, your options to get into it sometimes means stepping away from medicine. It's harder earlier on to sort of do a mix, although it's possible. Derek Kaur or Zhongwei Kaur, Adopt-a-Doc is a great way.
From Scotland.
Yeah. And he's doing a fantastic job of helping connect clinicians with health tech companies, because the health tech companies want to speak to clinicians. So he does a good sort of pairing.
Adopt-a-Doc, yes, he does. Yeah,
that's very good. There's also a lot of networks and events, and then you've got the AI Fellowship. You've got the Clinical Entrepreneurs Program. There are some other fellowships out there. But I mean, at its simplest, you're in hospital or in a practice and you're interested in tech. You just keep your antenna up, and when anyone in that building says, "Oh, we've got this tech project" or anything, you're like, "That's me. I'm the one that will come and help in on this." And that's how you build it up.
Sign up, contribute, pitch in.
Just get your hands dirty.
Going now forward, looking specifically at what we should be talking about, which is AI in healthcare. I think it'd be helpful to hear from your perspective, particularly because of your generalist and primary care background. What are we aiming for when it comes to AI in healthcare? We've gone through. I think we're probably in sort of second or third generation of AI in healthcare. It started in the early days around clinical decision support, diagnostics, with sort of limited or moderate success and penetration. And the latest is primarily driven by large language models and foundation models, and eventually sort of more multimodal activity. But it seems it's driven largely by technological innovations, right? So when convolutional neural networks and dogs and cats in YouTube videos were the thing that the technologists were working on, in healthcare, we were looking at tumors in CTs. And when, ChatGPT came around, we suddenly were very interested in ambient documentation. Well, from a healthcare perspective, what do we want out of AI? And how would you design a clinical service, a pathway, whatever it may be, from an AI first perspective?
So I mean, the first thing to say is the right way to think about this is why are we doing this? Where do we want to go? And what problems do we need to solve to get there? That's it. So let's start with hopefully the easy bit. It's actually not that easy to type down personally, but why are we doing this? As a doctor, I want to care for patients and help them not get sick, and if they're sick, get better, and if they can't get better, stay as well as possible. That's why I'm doing this, okay? And other doctors and people in healthcare probably feel the same. So that's the why of it. The next part of it is, how are we wanting to deliver this? How are we wanting to provide it? And we've got currently how we're doing things too, and there's some problems with it that are sort of getting in the way. And then it comes to can AI help that? And then as new technologies come along, we get very excited because it sort of unlocks the opportunity to sort of open up a category of problems. And then we start thinking of healthcare purely in that category, which is why actually I think generative AI and large language models are the really exciting part, because all of a sudden, previously it was there's a little bit here, a little bit there, and we now have a tool, general purpose technology that can do this. But I really want people who are maybe watching this, and this is what I believe, is that talking about AI as something distinct needs to go.
As in distinct from
well, it's like, we're doing medicine and we're doing this and we're a company that does something with AI. And it's absurd to say it almost. I mean, maybe not right now, but like, we're a company and we use the internet, or we use people, we use the internet, we use computers. It's redundant. Of course you're using all of those things for the most part. But right now AI feels like it's separate. It's not. Stop thinking about it that way. It's in smaller areas right now. Just assume that it cuts across everything else. So once you say that, we want to care for people, we've got the problems with how the service that we have, and then stop thinking about AI as being distinct. You then start thinking, well, where can AI as a solution be deployed? And of course, if you're focusing on the problem, maybe AI is not the right thing. Maybe the sort of sexiest, newest thing to do it, or the most expensive, difficult way of doing it. But there it is. And then think about what the priorities are and the ones that make a difference at the moment. Now, the problem I think that we have right now is that our eye has been taken away from the problem of the patient in front of us to the sort of higher level problem. We've got big, long waiting lists. We don't have enough money to do things. And therefore, what's the urgent priorities that we need to do? So all the kind of attention gets taken there. But when we look at something like ambient scribes, and I think ambient scribes are a really good example, very rarely have I seen a technology pulled towards people more. And I've seen a lot of technologies deployed, and it's always been like, we've got this technology, there's a few early adopters, and it's kind of pushed in, and eventually gets in. But ambient scribes are kind of being sucked in. Like people want them now.
And what's the explanation there?
I spoke to someone last night, and I wasn't talking about ambient scribes. It was a GP who just recognized me was speaking, or a doctor, and we just talk about some other things, and he said, but he's been using an ambient scribe, and he said, this has just taken me back 30 years. He says, for the first time, in such a long time, I feel like I'm talking to the patients. Right? That is the important thing. That is when care happens. Because we've been forced as practitioners and patients to receive care in such a transactional way for such a long time, because we have to try and churn people through.
Of course.
But we've kind of boiled out that care bit, and I think we all feel that side of things. If you were saying, oh, we want to try and solve that problem, I don't think anyone would come up and say, I just want the doctors and patients to feel better about how the conversation's going. That wouldn't be a problem that they think to solve. But ambient scribes in solving, getting better quality notes, reducing the time you spent on documentation, seems to have this other effect. And I think there's something very precious about that observation, and I think we need to really value that more. Why? Because it doesn't matter how much more efficient we make everything. If we just drive it faster with technology, no one's going to feel any better. We might get more units shipped.
But it won't be a different qualitative experience.
And that is what I hope AI to be able to do. As these technologies come in, they'll be moving the needle on some other stuff. But we have to feel better about the care that we're delivering as well. We must do that.
So on the topic of barriers to that sort of vision, there's a couple of questions, some that came beforehand, interesting, from Oliver Fudge, who's an underwriter.
Awesome.
And one that just come in now through Will Hughes. So Oliver, and because there's all sorts of challenges and barriers, right? But I want to focus on these two, right? So one of them is around unconscious bias with AI, and what work is being done to reduce or avoid unconscious bias. And I think things like automation bias probably fall under that sort of category as well. And then Will has a slightly orthogonal question to that, which is more around building alignment between strategic decision making and what's happening boots on the ground, and that's both clinically and non-clinically. So do you want to address those two barriers?
All right, okay. So I'll try and hold them in my head, but if I get off track, bring it back in. So let's start with that first one about unconscious bias. So we'll come on to automation bias in a moment, but unconscious bias, so at its simplest, for those that don't know, in essence, large language models or large models, or actually any model, is going to be critically dependent on the data that it's trained on. And so if you build a model and feed it data that contains bias, either consciously or unconsciously, it will reflect those biases, number one. And we all know that the data that we have out there is not terribly equitably distributed. There are areas and groups that really are underrepresented. So number one, You know, you put bad data in, you're going to get bad data out. No, but you can do something about this, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can build better data, you can correct it, you can train it. That's number one. Second thing is when you're sort of training these models as well, that you are alert to the possibility of bias and you test it and you validate it and then you monitor it in the wild, that it's still operating in a way that is providing equitable treatment and not evidencing bias. That's great. Thinking on the unconscious bias side of things, I sort of read this more about people using the technology and their biases, biases unconsciously affecting how that model operates. So let's just make an assumption that we've built a perfect model. It's got not unbiased data, it's got unbiased, it's been unbiased through its training, and then it lands in the lap of someone.
Yeah.
The first thing is, well, if it only lands in the laps of people that serve rich patients, well, there you go. There's your first thing. But if we take that out of the equation, when you're prompting, when you're writing something, how you instruct these models, how you use these models, and the wording that you use can be picked up by the models. They've been aligned to actually be helpful. And so they're not trying to pick up on your bias and amplify it. They're picking up on the meaning of what you've put in and then responding in that way.
Yeah.
So to that end and reducing unconscious bias, this is about people being aware of the fact that what unconscious bias is, full stop.
Yeah.
Right. And then how models work.
Yes.
And then how their interactions with the models could inadvertently lead them towards being biased in how they're instructing them. And then the final part is how do you detect bias when it comes out the other end, be a critical user of it.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of education and real world use of it.
Yeah.
But I think from the unconscious bias side of things, that's one aspect of it. And, so it's all actionable, but that's kind of the way in.
No, definitely. So it reminds me, so one of the things that we do is run training courses for clinical safety officers.
Mm-hmm.
Who are specifically tasked with assessing the safety of AI applications or systems.
Big part of my work.
Yeah, and so we were down in Kent yesterday, and in one of the examples that I use is exactly this scenario, and it's from an MIT paper from 2019 by, I think, Sam Finn et al. And it's an opioid abuse predictor. And it's based on the patient history. And in the first instance, the patient's described as suffering from back pain and I think something like alcohol abuse, and opioid abuse risk is high. You then substitute lumbago for back pain and dependence for abuse, and now the risk is low. And you can begin to see how unconscious bias in history taking or recording somebody's symptoms then manifests itself in a negative outcome because it gets fed into an AI algorithm.
Well, absolutely. And this is another thing, and it's really interesting to pick up. So I was speaking to a doctor who was previously a graduate in literary history, and he was doing some work with OpenAI, and we were talking, and he was saying people forget that the meaning of words in distant history still influence us now. And the classic example is the word hysteria. Hysteria, the idea is that this sort of mental health problems derive from, the womb, the uterus, as hysterical. And so there's this immediate kind of like bias and that side of things. And our language, our human language has been very, very influenced by that.
Yes.
All the way through. Now, we may say to ourselves now, it says, well, we don't talk about it that way anymore. We don't talk about this. Okay. And then I go and train a large language model. And I need to give it a lot of data. And I need to give it a lot of data that's out of copyright, preferably. Where am I going to get that? Ancient history. And so I'm going to train a model. And part of its training corpus is going to be screeds of text explicitly linking hysteria with the fact of being a woman or possessing a uterus.
Yes.
And even though you get lots and lots of examples thereafter, within those patterns, they will be there. And within the patterns of how we speak right now, they will be in there. So, we can't separate out from the past there.
No.
And I think about how I've seen doctors' notes evolve over time. I worked in clinical governance. I've read lots of notes. I've written lots of notes. And I started medical school in 1990. So the things that were written in notes then would make your hair curl, right? People then say, what we need to do with these models is we should just make all doctors' notes available, all nurses' notes available, and train a model off that. Think about that.
Yes.
In recent history. And also, even me as a doctor working now will write in a certain way to convey a certain message to another doctor. that is not explicit, but implicit in there. There's something about a challenge that I had with a patient or something, it's kind of almost coded in there. Maybe coded beyond the eyes of the patient. It is not coded to the eyes of the model.
Yes.
And so, like we've got a lot to unpick here.
Yeah, no. And then going to Will's question, which is one of the other barriers, but slightly orthogonal to the bias challenge, is around strategic alignment. So you see a lot of activity happening now, and I'll use like a generic word like activity, both at a ecosystem level, but even within organization, within trust, within single hospitals, you'll have radiology doing this, oncology doing that, clinical specialties doing something else, the CIOs, CDIOs with a different vision, and that can't persist for much longer, right? It's not efficient. We're not sharing lessons. We're not building infrastructure, doing things probably at an enterprise level. We risk creating the same mess we created with EHR and digital health implementation, where we had this sort of spaghetti junction of specialist systems, and then realizing we've got a huge interoperability challenge and other challenges either. But if you're leading a project, if you're an excited registrar who's followed your advice in cardiology or whatever, how do you ensure that strategic alignment?
It's very, very tricky. I suppose you sort of, you maybe first think, what is it? So if you think about the role of leaders in setting strategy and communicating strategy and having a culture within an organization that allows that to be well understood in the right way at all levels, then maybe there's been a failure of that already, which has led to this situation happening. I would suggest that is a perceived aversion to innovation, or it's not been communicated down the way, or an environment that is not as supportive of this can be translated into wanting to innovate being something that can only happen in your own space. There's no other people in my organization that would want to do this, but I still want something to happen, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. And then before you know it, pop comes another mushroom, which is another sort of system that, even with the best intent, has been done with imperfect knowledge about how everything else works. And then you've got one other system that's not talking to another system, and it's kind of vaguely pointing in the direction of where you want to go, as opposed to very, very crisply. So I think, how do we get around that? I'll come back to the registrar in this example in a moment, but I think this is why it's so critically important that we have leaders in organizations who understand the importance of their role in understanding innovation and what it is and how it's applied, and how you can use strategy and how you run the organization to have the high level message set up and design the culture within the organization to allow those people wanting to innovate to be identified, to be brought in, to share their knowledge, but also be instructed themselves as to how to connect with the rest of it, not to just continually reinvent the wheel. Because you're right, there's countless people. It's like, I built this great thing, and it's like, oh, I should introduce to so and so. They did this too. And then everyone's then it becomes like, well, now we're competing, and we could have actually been doing either helping each other or whatever. So I think that's the leadership side of things. From the registrar side of things, I think you can't wait around for this to be solved, because it's going to take some time as well. So some of the effort's going to have to be in there, and making sure that you look within your organization and try and identify other people doing the same thing. Have a community of practice within there as well. If there's not one that's formal, certainly bring this one in there. And if there is one that's formal, join it and represent. And within those there who have an interest and a passion for leadership, get that influence higher up as well, and start to make that change. I think, be proactive. Don't wait for it to happen. But take the right steps. And I think that's a kind of top down and sort of middle up. I haven't got to the bottom part. Maybe we'll do that in a moment. But that's my recommendation there.
Fine. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm very conscious of time, and I want to get on to Curistica and how you're helping the ecosystem today. We've got another question come in from a lawyer, Jared, from Brown Jacobson, who's a friend of Newton Street. And so he said, and it's quite a long question, so I'm going to try to figure it out. So as a lawyer, I spend a lot of time talking to people about how they can use the data they hold with AI. They are looking at purchasing or developing to support their clinical work. So there's AI that they're looking to purchase or develop. To me, there's still, and to Jared, there still appears to be great concern of the ability to use patient data, and especially the ability to process it outside the organization. In some international work, the benefits of sharing patient data are clear, but the concern over sharing it still seems to be a significant barrier. Have you found this fear is reducing, or do you think we need to demystify the information laws to empower people to maximize the potential of AI? I've got a view on this, but I want to hear yours.
Yeah, it's difficult. I think it's a great question, and I can be positive. I think we're moving in the right direction on this. We'd always maybe want it to move faster and so on. I think people need to understand data and data privacy a little bit better. I mean, that's going to be my answer to every question, by the way. People need to understand it a little bit more, but then we have to work out how to make that understood more. I think when it comes, if I spend a lot of time with Curistica, like working on the kind of supplier side. I've been a frontline user, I've been involved in the procurement and everything, but now I'm on this side as well. And what I see and what I hear from either our clients or actually people more widely is that it just seems really capricious, the decisions, unpredictable. Like you'll go to one trust and you'll go through the hard work, or maybe it's easy work, and you'll go through it and you'll get approval under the DPIA and everyone's quite happy and you think this is happy days, I'm going to move just 5 miles down the road. A completely different outcome, different questions come back down the way. Yet very, very little has changed. Almost nothing's changed on the supplier side. And very, very tiny things have happened on the other side. So there's this inconsistency about how existing standards and guidelines are applied, I think is causing a lot of people frustration. So on the supplier side, I spend a lot of time saying, well, look, we can't just sit back and wait for it to be solved. Let's make sure that we're as good as possible and making it as clear and transparent and being proactive, and then sharing where we find this to be helpful to help raise the tide, the tide for everyone else. So that's the kind of supplier side. On the sort of the buyer side and the procurer, I think it's making sure that those people that you cascade the understanding about data protection, and you really do query when there's no, we can't do this because of X. Really, particularly for a leader in that situation, really kick the tires on that decision as well, because sometimes it can't be done just because it's kind of difficult to do, or it's perceived to be difficult to do, or it has to be locally flavored. That takes, quite good leadership, I think, there. So there's no really crisp answer. I don't know the answer is.
Well, I think the answer is that there aren't any absolute barriers. It's about engaging with the issue from an informed position and willing to do the necessary work it takes, which sometimes includes patient and public engagement. It sometimes includes ethics applications. It sometimes includes transparency or privacy notices. It's not quantum physics, right? We know how to do these things, and these things do happen, as in data is used to develop AI, and it is used to evaluate AI. Just from our perspective, my personal perspective, I've been a clinical academic. I've used NHS patient data with consent and with the appropriate ethics approval without patient consent as well, in order to either develop or test certain AI applications within the NHS. And it happens routinely. It doesn't happen everywhere. And I think Gerard is pointing at it in his question. A large part of it is because of a fog around what the information laws actually mean, individual data protection officers' responsibilities and their own expertise and know-how, and how that varies across the country is really where the challenge is, at least from the NHS or provider end.
I think the other thing that might be interesting is actually if there's sort of real variation in decisions where the sort of variables fed into it are much the same. It'd be lovely to see a kind of audit of the decisions. A decision was made, yes here, no here. Let's look at why, and let's pick out in a non-judgmental fashion, and say for openness, was this justified? Equally, if they said yes and it shouldn't, sort of thing. It's all about openness and transparency on that side of things. I think the other things to sort of bear in mind as well is whether it's data protection, whatever it is, we also have to deal with the fact that humans are fearful of change for the most part as well. And so, sometimes data protection issues can be the convenient peg upon which to hang the reason that you just don't want to change, or so that has to be carefully managed as well. It's like health and safety can't do it, and of course it's not that. It's just that they just don't want to do it. So that also has to be managed. But data protection is a tricksy area.
Yeah, no, of course. And then finally, to wrap up, I want to move on to what you're working on now, day to day. So, before founding Newton Tree, I led an AI team at a pretty big provider, a secondary care trust, and my experience of vendors changed over time, right? And I sort of divide it into sort of two eras, sort of pre-COVID and post-COVID, roughly. Not related to COVID, it just happens to be around 2019, 2020, where we would get a lot of inbound from innovators, product developers, companies who developed something in the AI space, and I a lot of times wouldn't understand why they did it. As in, who told you to solve this problem or that we had this issue? And what I then realized was that they had lacked a lot of clinical leadership in their business strategy, their product strategy, and that's starting to be less and less the case.
Yeah, we're seeing
a lot of CMOs, a lot of mid-career medics and healthcare professionals being heavily involved in industry, which in turn means then for the healthcare system, when you go out to procure or evaluate the market, you have actually real products that are actually helpful and come from an informed place of the actual challenges that are being faced by the health system. And off that basis, what's Curistica doing in that space and more broadly as well to help mature some of these vendors and the products on the market?
Yeah, well, you've just described perfectly what Curistica does. So when you're building something in health tech, there's two parts to it, health and tech. I'm often surprised at how little health is represented in there, particularly in positions of leadership. I did my entire dissertation on this matter. But if I just boil it back to something simple, clinicians coming into a health tech company are critically important because they bring the clinical subject matter expertise. They bring their professional sort of standards as well, the sort of ethics and morality and understanding of medical science and clinical science as well. That's what comes in. And they also come in with understanding the system and their network and how to speak to other clinicians and translate from clinicians outside into this. So there's no loss of signal. So what's being built actually reflects what's happening out here. That's sort of part one. Then the second part of it is the understanding of sort of safety and compliance as well. And this is the sort of commitment to doing clinical safety, regulatory compliance, data protection, cybersecurity, generation of evidence, and all that kind of thing. And clinicians are well placed for that. They don't have that as standard for the most part. That they go off and learn to be a clinical safety officer or work in the regulatory side. And so clinicians will often be brought into companies to do that too. And then the final part is actually understanding how these companies work. And this is the sort of product side of things. So when I talked about Curistica, sort of fractional chief medical, product and compliance officer services, that's a kind of shorthand for bringing clinical subject matter expertise, understanding product management, product development, and the sort of the build side. And then the compliance side is all those other parts. And I think those are really important skills that you need to bring in at the earliest possible opportunity. Because if you don't, you start to acquire kind of clinical debt. What you're building isn't fully informed by this, and then you're going to struggle to sell it to people, or you're building a solution to the wrong problem. But also compliance or governance debt, as in you build something, you think you did it right, and all of a sudden, oh my God, we've got to get this done, and we're in a scramble. The problem that people have is that they sometimes think of these things as being separate.
Yeah.
They're not. They are absolutely together and need to be together in partnership with all the other members of this product team at the start to set you off in the best direction that you're building something safe and effective. Now, you may have to choose because you don't have all the money in the world to do this as well. I understand that. Curistica is here to help solve that because I and the team that I work with have this blend, but we also understand the reality of working in this. I've worked in a whole bunch of different places, and I've also been a frontline clinician and everything. We do this in a fractional basis because you don't have much money or time, or you've got lots of decisions to make. So you can bring in a sort of specialist generalist for a specific task. So for us, it's often things like clinical safety work. But with that, we take a product-informed view to this as well. So the work that we do is not separate, but integrated across the piece. And that's what we try and do and are having real success with in Curistica, is offering that and helping get either people back on track or off to the best start.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We're right on time. And as always, it's not enough time. I would love for this to, or maybe we should make this a longer conversation. You're very available online, which means there's lots of
available online,
lots of different channels to contact you through. So I was going to say, what's your preferred way of people getting in touch?
Yeah, sure. So 2 ways of getting in touch. I'm always on LinkedIn. So it's Dr. Keith Grimes on LinkedIn, and I'll be often posting and responding and commenting and everything. So that's a great way in. If you do connect with me, do try and send a message, because I do get quite a lot of connections. So a bit of context helps. Like a large language model, I need a little bit of context. Or the website, it's just www.curistica.com. That's CURISTIC8.com. And we put a lot of blog posts and information there, information about the services. But there's also a form that you can send information. But I turn up at the opening of an envelope. So I'm often at events as well.
Hey,
so.
Yeah, you're in the service industry.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, I do it because I love it.
Of course.
And then business.
Yeah.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Keith. Thanks everyone for listening in. Until next time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.